You are welcome to raise your hand, to use the chat function, to ask questions as the night goes on. I would appreciate it if you're going to ask a question through your voice, through unmuting yourself, if we could hold off to those until the end. But if a chat question comes up and you want to ask it, we'll have Terrence, who's down in the South Sound area at the Nisqually Reach Nature Center. He will be monitoring the chat. He just waved. So he'll be answering questions as best he can. I've also got Joan, who is on Keynote with Soundwater Stewards. She'll be helping with tech and just kind of helping here and there. And then, of course, I can help too, but I'll be emceeing and talking a fair amount. So in general, how the evening is going to go, after I'm done talking, we're going to talk about the data, because, you know, that's a pretty big motivator for a lot of us. So Dave Krause, who's on Whidbey Island and has done an incredible job with getting us going on Survey 123 and just put in a ton of effort, is going to jump on and run down the season's data with everyone. And there'll be time for questions when he's done, potentially midway through. I'll let him decide how he wants to handle that. So after Dave, we've got a slideshow. So most of you probably got an invitation to send in some images or tell a story. I prepared a slideshow, a PowerPoint of a bunch of images that people sent in. They're not all of Pigeon Guillemots. Some are. Some are just, you know, anecdotes from the season. As we go through that, if, you know, at the end you realize, oh, I actually have something that I'd really like to talk about, we'll probably have time for that, but I'm going to try to leave space at the end, but we'll see how it goes. By around 7 o'clock, we will have Scott Pearson, and I'll introduce him more thoroughly later, but he's going to jump on and talk about his work as a senior research scientist at the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. So he will be coming on and talking about Pigeon Guillemots and how we collaborate with him, and just in general about seabirds in our region. So that'll be really awesome as well. So from there, unless people have questions about how this is all going to go, I'm going to turn it over to Dave. And Dave, you are able to screen share just as it goes. But if you have any questions, let me know.
Okay, it is. Hi, everybody. So I assume you can see the Salish Sea Guillemot Network title page here. Okay, great. So you're going to see quite a few charts after this slide. So for those of you who like charts, it's going to be great, but it could be death by 1,000 cuts for some of you. Like, I hope not. These are preliminary results for this season's survey. All of the data hasn't been checked yet, but what you'll see is probably pretty accurate. I doubt it will change much after this, if at all. And mostly what you'll see are results for just this last season, this last breeding season. We do have historical data for a lot of the regions, but we're still getting that transferred over into our new Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife system, and it's not ready to really analyze at this point. So Brennan talked about the Salish Sea Guillemot Network, and this is who it is. And the year spans after the names are the numbers of years that there's been an ongoing survey at each region. And we're welcoming a new region. Actually, they did some surveys this year that we'll be incorporating, but they are truly joining us next year, Jefferson County East. So it's real, I think possibly we're in 9 or 10 counties around the Salish Sea, it's really a great effort and really providing a lot of super information about what's happening with the Pigeon Guillemots in the Salish Sea. A few definitions to cover here, just so that some of the charts make sense to you. I know when I started, I am on a beach here on Whidbey Island called Fort Casey North. And I did a couple of seasons of data collection before I had any sense of what was happening with the data or why we were collecting what we were collecting. So I know a lot of you know the answer to that, but some of you are probably new and don't really know what's happening with the data. And Scott Pearson will certainly talk to that later, but this is what we're doing locally with the data. So this first one, PGE population for a region, we determine what that is by taking the maximum PG count for the season at a colony and adding that to all of the maximum PG counts for all the other colonies for that region to arrive at what we call the PG population for that region. An active burrow, that's a burrow that we have seen a PG enter, which we take to mean that there is an attempt to breed in that burrow. There's an attempt by a pair of Pigeon Guillemots to breed. And a chick burrow, that is a burrow which we've seen a Pigeon Guillemot enter with prey. So if we see that, we know that there is at least a chick in that burrow. So that is a subset of active burrow. So if you take active burrows and subtract the chick burrows, what you're left with are burrows that didn't produce chicks and pairs of Pigeon Guillemots that didn't produce chicks. These are some quick statistics from this last seasons. So there are 6 regions. There were 67 colonies surveyed. There are 699 surveys performed, that is a big number. That's just really impressive. And 3,671 hours spent doing that. The total Pigeon Guillemot population across the region, 2,183, with 423 active burrows and 275 burrows that volunteers saw Pigeon Guillemots enter with prey. And the total prey counted was over 1,000. So that could definitely make our potluck delicious. This first chart here is PG populations per region. And the last bar here is the total for the Salish Sea for our 6 regions. And there's a lot of variation between regions and how many PGs are counted. And a lot of that is due to just how many colonies there are. Keynote, for instance, has, which is a new region, pretty new. It's been active a couple of years, was surveying a single colony this year. So it's not necessarily a true indication of how many PGs are in the waters about that region. But at Whidbey Island, for instance, we have a really mature survey going. We have 26 colonies, 28 colonies this year. So we were capturing a large percentage of the Pigeon Guillemots in our waters. This, by the way, this slide deck will be sent out to the region leads, and they can send it out to their volunteers. So I'm not going to talk to this slide, but it's a bunch of data rolled up for each region. And there's another slide that rolls up the data for each colony. So if you're interested in your particular colony, that'll be included in this slide deck. So this slide shows the population of Pigeon Guillemots from week to week over the season. So down here on the at the bottom is the week of the year, and this little area up here gives you an idea of what times we're talking about with these weeks of the year. This is kind of a nice way of managing of showing the season over time. So here again, you see that the populations are pretty constant over the main part of the season. And then as chicks fledge, the Pigeon Guillemots start to leave the waters around the colony, and by the end of the season, they're all gone, basically. Where do they go? I don't know, ask Scott Thompson that question. Pearson, I'm sorry. This slide shows the breeding percentages for this last year at each of the regions. And I need to move something there. The dark orange is PGs attempting to breed as a percentage of the total PG population at that region. And the lighter, the yellowish, is the percentage of breeding PGs as a percentage of the PGs at that region. So you'll see that the average here for all of the regions is about 25% of this last bar here is about 25% of the total PGs counted have a burrow and are delivering prey to that burrow. And this number here for this orange one for the region is just under 40%, probably 39%. And those are the PGs that we saw. That's a percentage of PGs that we saw entering burrows. So this 25% figure, not a bad figure, I think. 25% of all of the Pigeon Guillemots are actively feeding chicks. And we track this at Whidbey, we track this year to year, and I think we have a slide that shows that. This is for Whidbey. I've thrown a couple of Whidbey slides in here just so you can see over time how the data begins to have significance, because you can see trends in what's happening. And this slide shows the number of chick burrows that we have counted at Whidbey from 2008 through 2021 through this year. And there in this area, the first 8-10 years, we had a higher number of, we counted a higher number of chick burrows. And we've had a kind of a, since 2017, we've had a bit of a decline in the number of chick burrows we've counted. And this year it popped up a bit again. So we're anxious to see what the trend will be, anxious to see next year. This slide takes a little bit of description. This is also a Whidbey slide for the same period, 2008 to 2021. And the blue line here is the percentage of Pigeon Guillemots attempting to breed. for each year. The dark blue line here is the percentage of Pigeon Guillemots breeding. So actively feeding chicks for those years. And the percentages are over here on the right axis. The columns, the gray columns, are the number of PGs, the PG population for that year, for each of the years. And the left column, or the left axis, tells the number of that. So there, here again, you can see at Whidbey, we've had a gradual decline in the number of Pigeon Guillemots that are successfully breeding as a percentage of the population. Back here in 2013, the percentage of breeding PGs was about 35%, and this year it was 24%. This is this one here is a pretty fun chart if you have a lot of years to show. So again, the horizontal axis on this chart are weeks of the year, so weeks of the season. Week 23 is generally what we call the first season of the year, or first week of the year, June 7th through 13th. Sometimes it's the very beginning of June. And for each region, each line is the prey delivery for a region. So this blue line, the dark blue, is Whidbey. This lighter blue here is South Sound. This gray one is Clallam. And Vashon and Kitsap Bainbridge and Camino are down here, monitoring fewer colonies. And generally what you'll see, if you have a bunch of years and you throw all of those years together and you plot it, you'll have a pretty nice curve that goes up just like this, and the peak of that will be in the mid-July to early to mid-August time period for Whidbey. It's not the same for all of the regions. For South Sound, you'll see that their peak is probably a little bit earlier than Whidbey, and Clallam might be a little bit later, and that probably has to do with regional temperatures. But that's another thing to study. But anyway, putting the region delivery rates together like this can show some differences that lead to questions about, well, why is it that way? Let's try and figure that out. So we monitor in this survey basically 3 types of prey: sculpin, gunnel, and anything else that we couldn't figure out what it was, or it was something besides sculpin and gunnel, we put in the other category. So this slide shows for each of the regions for this year the proportion of basically gunnels to sculpins, and pretty gunnel rich. And gunnels, and this is probably for Scott Pearson as well, but gunnels are a much more beneficial food source than sculpins. So presumably Pigeon Guillemots would favor getting gunnels over sculpins if they're available for their chick. And they also present less of a hazard to chicks for getting stuck in throats. So I would think that a high gunnel rate is a great thing, but at Whidbey, I don't have the chart for this, but over the last several years, over about the last 5 or 6 years, the proportion of gunnels to sculpin has been decreasing. And in fact, 2 years ago, there were more sculpins delivered to chicks than gunnels. And this year, it's kind of righted itself again, more gunnels than sculpins. but that would be another, a study based on what are the food sources for PGs could illuminate, what's happening in the greater Salish Sea, and what is the availability of foods for seabirds. And that last slide, I'll bring it up here. This is I'm not going to talk to it, but this is the colony data, and this will be included in the slide deck if you'd like this slide deck. So if you're interested in what your colony did relative, or what it's like relative to other colonies, or just want to see the data for your colony, it's included here. So that is it. And if I can, I will get out of this.
Awesome, Dave. Thank you so much for doing that. Let me pull up the chat here. Okay, so we've got some questions. So Maria asked what the dip that we saw in week 29.
Yeah, that was really interesting. It looked kind of like an inverted Pac-Man there. So I went back and looked at the notes in our survey 1, 2, 3 surveys, and a couple of people noted that tides were really low that survey period, and there has been some conjecture that low tides inhibit Pigeon Guillemots from delivering. I'm not sure why that would be, but it's something that people have noticed, or they think they've noticed over time here on Whidbey. And there were also a couple of colonies that basically they started early and ended early. For instance, one colony delivered 13 prey the week before that, and then was done that week. So that accounted for a third of that dip. But it's not really, I don't think we've really understood completely why that happened, and maybe we won't. It is rare. It hasn't happened to that extent before in the 13 years that we've been doing this.
Yeah, and this doesn't really add much to that, but there's seasonal variances, all over the place in lots of populations, and you can see different weather events that affect breeding.
I'm looking at Paulina Berry's statement about maybe the smoke and heat of the week affected the birds' activity levels. Yeah, if that was then, yeah, that could be a possibility. Francis Wood wondered if the heat wave earlier in June might have had some impact on the breeding cycle. So that's another possibility.
Jenny, that's a big question. Why do we monitor Pigeon Guillemots? I think there's a lot of answers to that, but I think on the whole, and I imagine that Scott Pearson is going to kind of talk about this a little bit. One of the biggest reasons is they're a breeding seabird that's all across Puget Sound, which is actually not super common. They're the only alcid that breeds in a lot of Puget Sound, minus some big islands here and there. Their mode of breeding is not quite as, they don't breed in giant colonies in a lot of cases. We have some big colonies on Whidbey Island, and actually out, looks like you're in Squim. So there's some bigger colonies that direction. But on the whole, because they aren't easy to study like some seabirds, you go to an island, you go to Protection Island, and there's your study population. They're kind of spread out, so they haven't always gotten as much attention. You know, when this study started, you know, that was part of the idea was, well, there's this whole group of birds that isn't getting nearly as much attention. So that's an answer. There's multiple answers. There's some more stuff coming in question wise. Dave, are you seeing those questions?
Right. The statements about doing a correlation between tides and deliveries is we've been discussing that, and we do have some historical data that would lend itself to doing that. I think you kind of need maybe more than an hour look, so that you can see the impact of a tide change over the same day, to see if that has an impact on the frequency of deliveries during that extended survey. But there are a lot of really clever people at UW, and they're working with our data, and we may be able to get somebody to look in depth at that question.
Yeah, I'm just in general, even if we don't have answers to all the things or the questions that people are throwing out, I just like seeing all the thoughts that folks are having about all of this. Yeah, and Demi was asking about, you know, why the extended season on Whidbey. And, you know, more colonies definitely offers more opportunity. And maybe Dave, maybe Francis, you have thoughts about why there's colonies that breed later, why there's colonies that start later, those kinds of things. I don't personally have the answer to that, and I'm not sure that anyone really does. Our
early colonies are the warmest colonies.
Okay.
So that appears there again, though, that's hypothesis. You know, we haven't studied that, but that seems to certainly be the case, that the sooner it gets warm, the sooner you have breeding at a colony.
Good exposure.
If I could just add a little bit to that, Brendan, what Dave means by warmer is that we have colonies on the north side of Penn Cove, and therefore they have a southern exposure. And those are traditionally the first ones that start up. And then given that Whidbey is such a long skinny island, we also have east and west sides. And so there's a lot of different terrain and habitat that might affect that.
I'm looking at Barbara Brock's comment about saying the Camino colony is in especially shallow water, so low tide seems to really affect deliveries. So that would be another variable to throw into that tide study, would be the how sloped the floor is of the sound. That would have to be taken into account too. So it's not totally simple, right? These things, it's a bit complex, but universities are really capable of doing this.
Totally. Hey, not that I want to rush things along, but I want to move on to the next part of our evening, because I want to make sure that we're ready for Scott when he pops on here. I actually haven't checked recently if maybe he might have already gotten here. Doesn't look like it. No worries. All right. So for some of you that came on later, and I think most people are aware of that, again, thank you so much, Dave. Thanks, Francis, for popping in there. Thanks, everyone, for your questions and just your general comments. That was really wonderful. You know, it's part of the motivation, but I also wanted to talk about kind of the storytelling, the fun moments on the beach side of things. And, you know, we, those of us who are on the beach surveying are doing it in different parts of quite a big area. And I think most of us have a sense that Whidbey Island is a very different place from, you know, the bottom of Puget Sound and South Sound, there's a lot of different habitats. You encounter a lot of different things. And I invited folks to share via photos or stories that they have to tell. And I'm going to start that off. And the way this is going to work is that I have a slideshow set up. I'm going to start because I have some stuff I want to share. And then other folks are going to follow me, and I will basically call on you. But if you're expecting to present tonight, pay attention so you don't get surprised. Don't go grab a refreshment and discover that we've been waiting for you. But let me. Oop. Jumping ahead, the teaser. So when we get to your slide, if you're expecting to talk tonight, just go ahead and unmute yourself and tell us about what we're looking at, and you can tell me to advance the slide or go back or whatever you want, but I'll be in control here. So I wanted to talk about my experience as a coordinator, because I get to go out to all the different areas. And here's a picture of Francis and Lee out on Whidbey, and that really beautiful bluff. We had a really great morning there. And, one of the things I really appreciate about getting to interact with all the folks that are engaged in this survey is just the hospitality that I'm shown when I show up in a place I've never been before. We have the Pigeon Guillemots to tie us together, but I think there's a little more than that. And every spot is a little different. Some colonies, you really don't get to see birds sitting on ledges like this. And the same morning, I got to encounter these two. We were pretty close to them because they were right, on the bluff, and there just wasn't really anywhere for us to go or them to go besides out into the water. And we all know that they're charismatic, fun birds, but it's still fun to get really good looks at them. That same morning, Francis was very excited to see this. There's actually two. You can kind of see one of the Pigeon Guillemots that's out on kind of more on the boat end of things rather than the actual outboard. But Francis thought it was pretty funny to see these. And we see Pigeon Guillemots perching and even sometimes breeding in really funny places. But this was a new one for her, and that means something if it's new to her. The other thing I wanted to talk about is that we see all these other things when we're on the beach. And when I was out helping look at sites with Brenda in Jefferson County, on my way back, I stopped at one of the sites and was I really like looking at invertebrates, and this crab spider was in a yarrow that grows on the beach. There's flowers, there's insects, there's whole communities that are in those bluff communities of things going on, like tiger beetles, which is the insect on the left, and this sand wasp, American sand wasp on the sea rocket flowers, which is a brassica. I just think that's kind of part of the charm of getting to spend time out there. Yes, it's about the Pigeon Guillemots, and yes, it's about our community science effort. It's also about paying attention and getting to go to a place over and over again. So that's all I had to say. Govinda, do you want to tell us about what's going on here?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I've been volunteering with the Double Bluff crew, which is a very large colony. We've got a team of about 5 people or so. And every Friday we go out to the beach. And this particular week, we had a coyote. And I know Lee Kuba is here in the crowd with us tonight. And it was Lee who who spotted the coyote when the survey was over. We saw it at the beginning of our survey. It was right in front of us and kind of ran down the beach. And we said, oh, hey, look, coyote. And did our survey. And then as we were walking back, she's like, hey, that coyote is on the bluff. Just had a little that in fact is like 25 years old. But I was still able to capture this critter on the beach, and I'd like to share with you just how camouflaged it is. And here's that next slide showing that coyote on the beach, and it's just the same color as the bluff behind it. And you can hit another slide there, Brendan. See, you don't even see him at all. No, there he is. So let's see. So he is in this picture somewhere. And yeah, is that right? I thought I circled him.
No, you didn't, but I'll go to the next.
Yeah, there he is. Yeah, I see him. I saw right when you had moved your cursor around. So there's that coyote. And if you want to maybe back up the slide, yeah. So you can, now that you've got your eye on him, he's kind of, you know, right in between where the blackberry and the sand hits.
Govinda, when you first sent me these photos, there was a split second where I looked at the first and this slide, and I said, I still don't see it. I thought, like, did I get the wrong photo? But
yeah, pretty
amazing.
Pretty amazing. So that was just, you know, one of the things that we see on the beach. Like Brendan said, yes, it's all about guillemots, but it's about everything else too. And I think that was the end. I think I just had those two photos.
Yeah, that was it.
Okay, I'll mute myself now.
Maria asked a question. All right, and there's going to be some folks that sent me photos, but you know, maybe weren't planning on talking, so there's no pressure either. But Laura, who's out here on Vashon Island, has been really active and done a really great job of telling the story of the pigeon guillemots that are breeding on the docks that the ferries, the North End ferry docks on Vashon Island. And one of our local photographers here, Jim, has been going out there and taking photos, and he got some really great images this year. I don't know, I haven't seen if Laura's here or not tonight, but I'll move on from there. I really like that one. That's a fun photo. The fun thing about the Pigeon Guillemots is that we kind of, and I'm a person that often is commuting to downtown Seattle from Vashon Island, and the Guillemots are right there for a good portion of the season, and you get to see them kind of from above a lot of times. And let's see if this video works. I just thought it was fun because it's fun to have this be a part of your morning commute if you're heading into town. I always try to point out to people that they're there, because sometimes people don't notice them. But I think the best part about it is because pigeon guillemots are so vocal, it's kind of hard to miss the birds. Nope. Didn't want to play it again. There we go. And I don't know if Dan's made it on here yet.
Yes, I'm on.
Dan, do you want to talk about what's going on here?
Sure, I will. Some of you may not know that there's a colony of guillemots at the Keystone Ferry. And this is where they are, what you're looking at. It's about 200 yards south of the ferry. It's a structure that sits in the water all the time. There was a colony of about 60 guillemots living on or around this pier. At any time, about half of them were on the pier, about half in the water. They shared the pier with about an equal number of nesting cormorants and a variety of other birds. I and Betsy Brace and Locke Pope worked the site from June into September, and most of these photos are from Locke. Next picture.
Go.
There we go. Although it was a large colony, there are only 2 places on the pier that were used for nests, and they were both in unusual spots. One of them was in a pile of wood that's in a circle. That's a different picture. Well, you can see we've got a couple of sculpin there.
Yeah, Dan, I didn't include that photo because I thought I could show everyone
okay.
with my
Well,
cursor.
looking at this one, you see that where he's circling there, that pile of wood, that's where they built a nest, if you want to call it a nest. So I wouldn't call that a burrow. If you look to the right of the pile of wood, you see something that's kind of in the shape of a cannon with a gull on top of it. And there is a big gear there that's connected with a cylinder, and another one built, again, I don't know how to call it a nest, but that's where they laid the egg. So those were the 2 spots. There's a couple of deliveries. This is kind of a social hour for the guillemots. Only one was making the delivery, but it was kind of a community event. There was always at least a half a dozen others hanging around while that was going on.
So Dan, are those eggs that I'm
No.
circling with the cursor?
No, those are not. I never
Okay.
saw an actual egg. Those are just parts of the pile of wood.
That's what I figured. They look like they're quite close to getting crushed by some wood, but
I didn't see one sitting on it. Because what they would do is walk into that pile of wood beyond where I could see them. But clearly they were going in and making a delivery. And there are cormorants around in the same area, laying eggs too and sitting on the eggs. This is that second close-up. If you look right in the center, do you see the bird there? In the lower gear, you see the silhouette of the bird. So those are the 2 places where they laid the eggs and made the deliveries.
all right. Dan, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Kathy, who hopefully is here, wanted me to share these photos of both survey partners and close encounters with guillemots leaving their burrows. I'm always surprised at how close when you're at a colony, how close you are to birds coming and going, and you can see, both our surveyors here pretending to be part of the log. Some other stuff that we see on the beach. Kathy wanted me to note that those are gulls, not seagulls, and that is a sea star, not a starfish. Didn't want to make sure that we didn't embarrass ourselves. But then also, we're lucky. I forget this. We get to see deer a lot across our region. I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure that deer have been increasing on the whole. I know that there's population issues in certain areas, but that's one of the pleasures that we have on beaches. And for some people, you might be sea deer. Yes, Terrence. You might get to see Washington State ferries while you're surveying, and others might not. But it's definitely part of the ambiance of being out on the water. And also brings up the fact that guillemots are pretty tolerant of certain things like ferries. I know in past years we've had them roosting and even breeding on quite close to where ferries are coming into dock. Louis, I'm not sure if you wanted to talk about your photos at all or just have me show them. I'm fine either way.
I don't really have a lot to say. It was
Yeah.
just a couple of fun photos.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's
And this is the same site where Kathy took her photos too. We're partners there at Glendale. We dance around.
I like that shot. That's a fun shot.
And that's Kathy looking up at the bluff with an eagle in the background and Glendale in the background.
That's awesome.
So that was it.
Thanks, Louis. All right. Michelle, are you here? Thought I saw you here.
Yeah, I'm here, and I was on Keynote with, gosh, I guess we had 6 or 7 people most of the time. And several times when it was a nice day, we came to my house and my deck where we can also see the bluff that we were monitoring. So we would come back and have home baked coffee cake from various participants and have coffee on the deck after we finished counting our gillies for the day.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really love seeing that. It's part of why we all do this, right?
Yeah, it was great.
All right. Debbie, I know I saw you here. What's this photo about? What do we have going on here?
Well, Brendan, we have one of our juvies, one of our juveniles that fledged this year. And Locke, bless his heart, when he heard about it, went out and took pictures so we could further verify that that's what we were seeing. But the unique thing about this is I'm at Fort Casey North with Dave and 4 other people. It's a big colony, and our high count this year was 72. At the beginning of the year, but we had fewer chick burrows than previous years. So we were all a bit concerned. And also the season tended to kind of draw out longer than ever. So we weren't sure what was going on. And every year we are so excited when we see one of these guys on the water, right? Because as we've already seen from the pictures, our bluffs are high, and probably most of yours as well as ours, the burrows are at the tippy top of the bluff. And I mean, those guys have a long way to go and a very arduous journey to get to the water when they fledge. So any year when we see even one, we feel so delighted. Well, this year, I think it was our 11th survey. So it was mid-August. As we were walking to our sites, we divide them into 3 areas because it's such a big bluff. We all looked out, and we could spy at some point 6 total juveniles on the water that one survey. And some of them were lone. There was a group of 3 or 4. I think they were just hanging with their juvies, that they knew from the burrows, I want to say. But anyway, they were really very busy diving for food, obviously. And that's the most any of us. And Marie, I don't think who's on tonight, she's been at this site the longest and for quite a long time. And she had never seen that many juveniles together for one survey. And what was phenomenal too is over probably the last, 4 surveys of the year, there was a juvenile, at least one juvenile in the water. And the very last survey, and I think, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the only bird spotted was the juvenile in the water. Everybody else had left him. But it was just it was heartening, since we had fewer chick burrows, to see so many juveniles in the water. It was really lovely.
Thank you so much, Debbie. That's awesome. These photos are really great too.
Oh yeah, Locke, good job. I mean, yeah, awesome.
Yeah, it's one of the struggles is getting good photos of them or seeing them even very well, and getting an opportunity like this is really great. Cool. Thanks, Debbie. All right. Up next, we've got Terrence. And Terrence, did you want to read this? What were you thinking here?
Sure, I can read it, or people can read for themselves, but I'll just go ahead and read it in case people are just wanting to listen. So this one is from one of our longtime volunteers, and it's about Mount Rainier. So watching Pigeon Guillemots is a highlight of the summer for me. I love being down on the beach in the early morning, often watching Mount Rainier and the Olympics slowly take shape through the mist. Aside from the occasional train or helicopter, there are few sounds besides crows cawing, chattering kingfishers, and the whistling conversations of the peagoos. Who would have thought that a bird delivering a gunnel to a hole in the bluff could be so exciting? JM. And then we have another story from one of our newer volunteers. This one, as you can see, these birds are falling in line, which is a little unusual, but there's something so magical about watching these adorable black, white, and red birds do their thing every week. Of all the seabirds, they have the most personality. They really are characters. The way they play water games, do flybys, plop into the water with a splash on landing, and vocalize together as a group. They never fail to bring a huge smile to my face. Even on mornings when I'm dragging, I am always grateful to be out there on the water, taking everything in and experiencing the wonder of life with these captivating little guys. SB. And then oh, sorry, go ahead, Brennan.
No, go for it. I was going to say, I was going to say, I thought you had something else you wanted to share.
Yes, I was about to launch into that. So personal story of mine, I usually spend most of my time at the desk and only occasionally get out to do surveys. But this one time, this I believe was probably about June or so, we got out to our colony and we were walking out to the site and we happened to run into the landowner who allows us beach access. And we got to chatting and she happened to mention, like, hey, I've got kayaks and canoes that you're welcome to use if you ever need to. And I thought to myself, well, that's a very generous offer and we generally don't need to use them, but we'll take her up on that if we ever do. And funny thing of all things, it happened to be a high tide week. And I thought that I had planned the survey correctly. And we got down to the beach and the tide was a little higher than I thought. So, problem. Fortunately, one of our volunteers who was with me, he happened to have chest waders with him. And he, in week 2, had actually gone out and waded out to his site, which is not something that we normally encourage, but he was pretty experienced, and so we were happy to let him do that. So we were faced with a bit of a conundrum because half of our team was going to arrive by motorboat, and we were the other half of the team that was supposed to survey by land. So given that the water was at least chest high, that really posed a problem for us. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll stay on land. I'll survey what I can from land. And then the volunteer with the chest waders can see if he can make it out to where he needs to be. And so I sent him out and he ended up having to turn around because it was too deep even for him. We didn't realize how thick the jumble of woody debris was at the base of the bluff. We've never had to survey a tide that high. And so kind of eating humble pie, we're like, okay, well, I guess we got to use the boats. So he ended up hopping in one of the kayaks. And then I hopped in the kayak and he ended up wading out to the first section that was actually feasible to wade out to. And fortunately, it was not too far to kayak out to where I needed to be. And well, things were all good. We met up with the crew that was supposed to do the boat survey. And halfway through the survey, I just happened to look behind me. And so given that this was not my own personal craft, I did not conduct a full inspection of the boat to inspect it for seaworthiness. And I did try to get the covers on all of the hatches, which was actually not working. The hatch covers did not fit securely. So I said, to heck with it, we need to go. So I just hopped in and, I just threw the hatch covers in the cockpit. And so off we went. And so, yeah, halfway through the survey, I looked back just to get my bearings and see if there's any birds behind me. And I noticed, well, the rear hatch has a lot of water in it. And I thought, oh, this is pretty bad. So I paddled to shore and I surveyed for the rest of the hour on the beach. And all the while, I dragged the kayak up on the beach and I let it drain out. So at the end of the survey, I went to inspect the kayak, and it turns out there's a really small hole. And yet in 30 minutes, I almost sunk the kayak. And I don't know what possessed me to just randomly look backwards and then notice that I was taking on a lot of water. So after the kayak drained and the survey was over, I had to figure out how to get back to where I started. And I just decided, okay, well, the tide's still a little too high to actually walk the beach and drag the kayak along. And I was not actually prepared to go out in the kayak either. So I ended up just hopping in the kayak and just paddling for dear life. Fortunately, I made it back to the starting point, and the kayak was only partially filled with water, not nearly as much as it was when I first discovered the problem, but I paddled fast enough to make it back safely. So, and then of course we ran into the property owner on the way out, and I told her that she had a little hole in her kayak, and she was a little mortified that I went out because I did not have a life vest. So I lived to survey another day. And that's my story.
Well, I mean, I think we all knew what the end of the story was. You're here today, and but thanks for sharing that, Terrence. It's a good lesson of how little hiccups can maybe go in bad directions. I'm glad everything worked out.
Yeah.
All right. We are at just a little past 7 o'clock, and I wanted to kind of move things along. Sure, there are probably other stories or other things that people want to talk about, but that's what I got from everyone. And I want to make sure we have plenty of time to hear from Scott Pearson, who is here with us now. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Scott. Scott is a senior research scientist with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, where he supervises the West Side research team. He has a Bachelor of Science and Master of Science from the University of Michigan and a Ph.D. from the University of Washington. His postdoctorate work at the University of Florida. He focuses in his research on primarily on seabirds, but also works on pinniped populations. So folks don't know what pinnipeds are, seals, sea lions, and such, and diet with implications for salmon predation. His seabird work is focused on marble murrelets and tufted puffins, and he also conducts research on other state-listed species like snowy plovers and streaked-horned larks. Scott, thank you so much for being here tonight with us. We're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say about pigeon guillemots and about birds in our area in general.
Well, thank you. Let me just try to share my screen and make sure I share the right screen. Let me go to presentation mode. Are you seeing presentation mode or are you seeing my?
We gotcha.
Perfect. I use Teams a lot and I don't use Zoom as often, and I always forget which one gets me where I want to be. So today I'm lucky. Well, thanks for the introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you and all of the active volunteers doing work on guillemots, thinking about the Salish Sea and Puget Sound, and probably many of you live close to the water and think about just our marine environment in general. So it's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. It's a world that I started off doing research on mostly forest birds. And even though I was always involved with wet systems and marine systems, and I think it was around 2004 where I became completely immersed in the marine environment and have been working in that environment almost exclusively since. And it was a really fun transition, but it was a really difficult transition. It's really hard to move from a terrestrial system to a marine system, because it's just a really different world in terms of what drives the system and how do oceans work. And that became a very steep learning curve. And in the process of that learning curve, I started working with a lot of people. And that's kind of been my strategy all the way along, is to develop partnerships. And partnerships for me are really important. Right away, I met and started working with Dr. Julia Parrish at the University of Washington, with Dr. Peter Hodum, who's at the University of Puget Sound. And then from there, that network just kept expanding. And because of their help, they really helped me move into this world and make it really possible for me to be successful. And those partnerships are key. And it's also what makes research and doing work fun, I think, is just getting to know other people and sharing that love, sharing that passion, sharing that investigation with other people. So today what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about Pigeon Guillemots as an indicator, and a little bit about how your work and how the data you gather fit into that. And I'm going to go back a little bit in time when Christine Gregoire was our governor. And when she was our governor, she created the Puget Sound Partnership. And the Puget Sound Partnership was tasked with recovering the Puget Sound by 2020. Well, 2020 has come and gone. And I can't say that we've saved Puget Sound, but I hope in some ways we have had some successes. In some cases where we haven't, and actually we've continued to go backwards. And so it's been a mixed bag, as you would expect. But at the time, they looked to the Heinz Foundation, and they looked at the Heinz Foundation and saw that they had these high-level indicators that were something like a dashboard on your car, and that tells you how it's performing. And they wanted a series of high-level indicators that they could use to understand how the system is performing. And I was approached to help develop those indicators. And I worked very closely with Natalie Hummel at the partnership, and she's still there. And we came out with this document you see here, which was essentially our recommendation and why. And what we needed was essentially to be able to hit the ground running. We needed to not start a monitoring program from scratch. We needed to have data that was already available and could tell us whether or not we were on the right track. And so we couldn't sort of create indicators from scratch, but we had to look at existing data sets, and we reviewed those. And when we did that, we came up with this suite of indicators. We would have liked to actually have considered others, such as shorebirds and some other species, but there really wasn't the data available. And actually on shorebirds, there really still is not the data available. And we came up with a couple of different marine indicators. The first one is this one here, which is the spring and summer density and trends for seabirds breeding in Puget Sound and the Strait of Juan de Fuca. So in the US portion of the Salish Sea. And that focused on the Pigeon Guillemot, the rhinoceros auklet, and the marbled murrelet. The marbled murrelet, people wanted me to remove immediately because it was controversial. We stuck with our guns and kept it. But boy, we got a lot of pushback on that one. And as I mentioned, this is a dashboard of indicators, and that dashboard was initially going to be very small, and it just kept growing. And as you can see from this wheel of vital signs, if you go to their website, you can see there are all different kinds of indicators. There's indicators of water quality, there's indicators of human health and population, and there's a wedge down at the bottom right, and that wedge is really focuses on species and food webs. And within that are things like orca and herring and salmon, but then there's also birds, and there's a terrestrial bird indicator and a marine bird indicator. Today, we'll just focus on the marine bird indicator. And one thing that I got approached by several people, some of them influential that had served in the federal government at high levels, and said, well, we want an indicator that is something that stays in the sound. And the problem is nothing really stays in the sound all the time. So you think about the summer bird community compared to our winter bird community. The community that we have right now has a lot of ducks and geese. It has a lot of grebes, it has loons, it has all kinds of things that are not here, or very few of them are here during the summer because they go north to breed. And so our actual suite of species that breed locally is actually pretty small. And you can see this handful of group of species here, mostly alcids, so things in the Alcididae family, and those are things like the tufted puffin, the rhinoceros auklet, which is also a puffin, the Pigeon Guillemot. All of those are alcids, and then also includes cormorants, terns, gulls, and I think I forgot to mention the marbled murrelet is also an alcid. And we really focused just on the US side of the Salish Sea. And the data set that really came to light as the one we would use was the marbled murrelet at sea surveys. And those have been done continuously since starting in the late 1990s and going through to today. They were using a stratified random sample for this area to estimate population trends and abundance for the murrelet. But while we do those surveys, we also record other bird species, actually, and mammals detected on those surveys. We also use a method that helps us address issues of detection. And so that was why this data set in particular came to the forefront, and had published methods, which is this general technical report you see in the middle here. And so what we do is we publish the trends on each of these species every time the surveys. We used to do annual surveys in the intermarine waters, and those went to every other year when budget cuts happened several years ago. So now we only report on these every other year. This past summer, we did the outer coast. That means this coming summer, we'll do the inland marine waters again. So we have to wait a year. So we can look at the trends of species, and here we're just looking at a very simple linear trend and saying, oh, is there a linear trend for the Pigeon Guillemot? And as you can see, there's not. And what we really should be doing, and we will start doing, I'm working with Sarah Converse at the University of Washington, and also Beth Gardner and one of their Ph.D. students, Sierra, and looking at ways we can start to look at some nonlinear trends. And you can really see that for the Pigeon Guillemot, it seems to almost go up and down and cycle in more of a wave. And so we'll start fitting some more complex relationships as we move forward. So I also report on the results and what we're finding. So we're finding that the marbled murrelet has been declining and continues to decline in the intermarine waters of Washington. It also has a negative slope on the outer coast of Washington, even though that has not been statistically significant in recent years. We also find the one bird that we do report on in terms of an overwintering bird are the scoters. And the reason we chose the scoters is they're highly dependent on the Puget Sound region for molting. And they seem to go back to these traditional molting sites year after year based on telemetry work. And so that's why we chose that as an overwintering species. And we do them as an assemblage, all three of the scoters we do together, and they've been declining. Whereas the other two species, the rhinoceros auklet and the pigeon guillemot, have shown more stable or fluctuating populations over time. So a lot of words here, sorry, I should have reduced the text on these, but that's basically what the message says. So then you can look at trends and you can look at these kinds of data sets, but they just tell you what's happening with the population. Is it going up? Is it going down? Is it fluctuating? But it doesn't tell us why. And it's really the ancillary data that's really key. And that's when I started looking at who else was doing work on birds. And I was doing work on rhinoceros auklets and tufted puffins, and we had some long-term monitoring on those species. And so we knew a little bit about their diet and about reproduction for those species. So we had some additional data there. But I was thinking about pigeon guillemot, and then I learned about this group on Whidbey Island that was doing work at the time, and citizen scientists, and reached out to that group and tried to figure out what they were doing, became very interested in that program and learning more about it. This is before it really had expanded. And so I started looking at those data and thought, well, okay, do they show similar trends to what we find? And in general, they do. They find population for the guillemot over time seems to be fairly stable in that data set. And here we're just looking at the Whidbey portion of the data set. And as we move into this wider range of folks gathering data and starting to use common tools and starting to come to a common data set, we can start to report throughout the whole Salish Sea, or at least the US portion of the Salish Sea, and start to see how the guillemot is doing. And then we can also, looking at the Whidbey data, it's kind of interesting when this was shared with me, is that this apparent sort of reduction in the number of chick-occupied burrows, and starting in really in the late, 2017, 18, and 19, and 20. And you see this sort of drop off occurring. And that was kind of interesting. And what I found really interesting is that drop off in chick occupied burrows. Remember, those are the ones that are contributing to the next generation. You really have to have fledglings out there if you're going to actually have a stable or growing population. And so then when you look at the diet data, one thing I found really fascinating in those diet data were these patterns that also occur in those same sort of years. And what we saw is this decrease in the gunnels in those years where we seem to have lower reproductive success, and we seem to have an increase in sculpins and other /unknowns. And so I don't know if that's a causal relationship, but it was enough to spark my interest in these data. And I think it's really, there's a lot of information here we can start to explore and start to unravel. And so I'm really excited about these opportunities. And fortunately, more recently, Sarah Converse got the co-op position, lead co-op position at the University of Washington with USGS. And she quickly, being Sarah, I knew Sarah from when she was at Patuxent, and had collaborated with her on some prairie research and other projects previously, and was excited about her arriving and knew what kind of person she would be, and that she would be a real go-getter, someone who would be out there pursuing a lot of ideas. And she quickly started getting involved with all of your work. And I know that you've interacted with Amanda, and Amanda's analyzed some of your data sets and started looking at new and really creative ways of analyzing those data. Liam is a new master's student in Sarah's lab that's also interested in pigeon guillemots and may start a project this coming year, and has been working with Peter and me and Sarah on ideas. And one thing that you may all not know as much about is that Lee Robinson, who used to work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and also with U.S. Forest Service, I don't know if she's on this call today with everybody or not. I didn't look at everyone who was on. But Lee, years and years ago, a bunch of boxes were put out for Pigeon Guillemots throughout Puget Sound. Mary Mahaffey was the lead on that. She's since retired. She was out of the Lacey office of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And the goal was that that work was part of the old, what we call PSAMP, and it predates Puget Sound Partnership and PSAMP and all these other acronyms. And it was the Puget Sound Ecosystem Monitoring Program. And that program, one of the things they were monitoring and interested in was toxics in the Sound. And we looked at toxics in a variety of ways. One in it is we looked at it in pinnipeds, and particularly looking at harbor seals. A lot of studies have come out of that, particularly some collaborative work we did with Peter Ross up in BC. At the same time, was some interested in trying to do some work on seabirds. Those boxes were put out all over the place, including on the Seattle waterfront, up at Port Townsend, a variety of places. And most of those boxes were occupied by things like actual pigeons and starlings, et cetera, and not by Pigeon Guillemots. A few were. But Lee established a bunch of boxes out on Protection Island, about 40 of them. And she monitored them for over a decade. Every box was monitored every year. Every adult associated with every box was banded. So a completely banded population. Super cool. A lot of information here, really neat. And so Amanda's been exploring that a bit just recently and just starting to dig into it. But she's starting to estimate demographic rates of survival. So how well do these animals survive? Looking at reproduction and a variety of other interesting life history factors. She's also looking at what environmental factors influence reproduction and survival, and just starting to explore that. So you can start looking at a variety of environmental variables and say, do they have an effect, a positive or negative, on reproduction and survival? I know this is complicated. This graph, all you got to know is that if it's high above the line and most of the error bar is above the line, it means it has a positive effect. If most of it's below the line, it has a negative effect. And there's all kinds of environmental factors listed here. And I don't expect you to understand them. I love the one called beauty. There's one called beauty and cutie. Beauty is looking at nitrates that come up as a result of upwelling. It's one of my favorite indexes just because of its name. But there's a variety of things here looking at sea surface temperature. When does the transition occur from upwelling to downwelling or downwelling to upwelling? All of those kinds of things you can look at and how they might affect reproduction and survival. And she's starting to see some effects. And she's just exploring this now, but it's really providing some insights into guillemots and what makes them tick. So that's exciting. We've met with Mike Johns, and Mike actually lives locally. He lives in Tacoma. He works for Point Blue. Point Blue is, many of you may have known, Point Blue is Point Reyes. Used to be Point Reyes Bird Observatory, and eventually they rebranded themselves as Point Blue. And he works on Southeast Farallon Island, and he works on a variety of alcids, really does really great work. And he ended up putting a bunch of units on Pigeon Guillemots down on Southeast Farallon Island, and then tracked them throughout a year. So starting in May, you're looking down at the bottom, and at the end of the breeding season, look at where all those Southeast Farallon Island birds go. They go all the way up here, beyond here, up into Haida Gwaii, all the way up into Southeast Alaska. And then when it comes time to breed, they all head back south to Southeast Farallon Islands. We have no idea what our guillemots do. And so that's why we're having these conversations now. Do our guillemots do the same thing, or because they're already up here, did they stay? And we don't know answers like that. And when I see data like this, it's just so exciting because it's just new things we had no clue about to see happening. So just really exciting work. And you can, another way of looking at the same information, you can look at where do these birds spending the winter and how much time are they spending there and when do they arrive? It's a complicated graph, but you can see there's a lot of weight, big circles up high. That's happening up in Haida Gwaii. Haida Gwaii, for people who are not familiar with that term, that's used to be the Queen Charlotte Islands. They're now called Haida Gwaii. That's this area right here. You can see we have some birds off of Vancouver Island. Some birds actually come through the Puget Sound and Strait of Georgia, but then they go all the way up into Alaska. So really interesting. And we can also learn a bunch of information from his tags. When are they wet and when are they dry? So when are they spending time out of the water and in the water? And you can see throughout the winter, they're mostly in the water, but during their breeding season, during the day and the night, they spend an awful lot of time out of the water. And they're really unusual amongst alcids. Almost all alcids, boy, they don't spend time out of the water. They don't perch on rocks. They don't do what guillemots do. Guillemots are really unusual that way. They're also unusual in their ability to fly and maneuver and land on land compared to a lot of other guillemots. You look at a rhinoceros auklet coming into a colony, they have two speeds. They're going 100 miles an hour or they're stopped. And they hit the island at going 100 miles an hour. They're not able to hover. They're not able to do the things a guillemot can do. And maybe that's why you see this just an amazing amount of time spent on land, which is really unusual in that family. So really fascinating stuff. Sorry, I'm just giving you a taste for it here. I want to make sure there's some time for questions. I've been yakking too long as the guillemot's telling the puffin. The puffin's actually saying nothing because they don't make any, they hardly ever make a sound. That puffin's actually, I just happened to catch it at the moment it was yawning. So it was this sort of lucky catch here, right off Protection Island. These two birds were together one day. And maybe while I'm answering your questions, I'll show you a few pictures I've taken of guillemots recently. So if there are any questions or if I have time, I may have gone too long.
No, you've definitely got time, and we've got as long as you're willing to be here and as long as folks are wanting to ask questions. But thank you so much, Scott. That was really, really awesome, really wonderful to see those connections of our work to what you're doing. So folks, if you have questions and you want to just go ahead and unmute and ask them, you're welcome to do that. If you're feeling bashful and you want to type in a chat question, that's fine too. But we've got Scott here and got some time. I see Lisa asked a question here. How is Protection Island doing? And maybe Scott, if you're going to do a better job of explaining what that question's all about, but
Sure.
Yeah, go for it.
I've been going out annually to Protection Island since 2004, and a very special place. There are 3 important islands in the Salish Sea to seabirds. And sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. I didn't think that would happen, but when people intentionally set fires on an island, it's just really awful. In terms of islands in the Salish Sea, protection is the most important of all the islands, and it has 35,000 active rhinoceros auklet burrows on it, based on our stratified random sample we did in 2008. We haven't resampled since. It had one of the largest glaucous wing colonies in the whole Salish Sea. It had black oyster catchers nesting on the beach. It has pigeon guillemots, and the pigeon guillemots nest both in auklet burrows up on the cliff face. But what's interesting about the guillemots on protection is they actually nest in the intertidal, or actually above the intertidal. Sorry, on the driftwood. So in the driftwood clusters on the beach, you actually find that they go into that. So just above the high tide, and they go right into the driftwood, and they nest in that area. And this island is been an important island for local tribes and for seabirds for decades. We have had fires on it in the past. This fire was set apparently intentionally. No one was caught. Rumors about 2 guys in a boat, but it doesn't really help. But apparently there was no other way the fire could have started. They did find an incendiary device, so it's very likely that it was human caused. We were lucky the wind was coming from the direction it was. That island has very, very dry grass, and it's dominated with dry grass. It goes across the vast majority of the island. And when Vancouver originally wrote about it, there's some great old quotes about Protection Island. He described the promiscuous trees, which it seems odd to us today to think about that term being used that way, but he means that sort of scattered about, and it mostly being covered in grass. So the fire moved up the slope. It was set in the late summer, and I got a call at the moment it was burning. I was actually on Destruction Island at the moment it was on fire. And it burned up the slope, and the wind was coming from the opposite direction. And normally it's coming from the other direction in that time of year, and it had been all summer. It was kind of unusual. And that caused it to go very slowly and creep up. And the other thing that makes protection a little more vulnerable is the grasses that now dominate those slopes, particularly that slope that burned, which is right above what we call Canum Spit. And that's all state land. A lot of people don't realize that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service managed 3/4, or actually maybe over 3/4 of the island. And one part of it is the Zella Schultz Reserve that was protected by a group of very active Audubon people. Zella was one of them, and ended up realizing the value of that island and protecting it. But it was really the Zella Schultz portion of the island that burned, and the fire, we were lucky in many ways it occurred when it did. Most of I would say over half the rhinos had fledged already from that area. That area has a lot of rhinos. Sorry, I call rhinoceros auklets rhinos. We were able to get out and revisit some of our plots right after the fire. And actually the rhinos seemed to do okay with the fire, at least the vast majority of them. They appeared to be either empty, suggesting the chicks had fledged, or there were still chicks in there and they still looked okay. And usually you can tell when they're not doing well, and they seem to be okay. So that would suggest that most of the adults were coming back. I did find a number of dead birds up on top, chicks that were abandoned. And I think we had a really high abandonment rate on some of those chicks that were left, and they just came out of the burrows and starved to death up on the surface. And so found them up on the blackened surface where it burnt. And the gulls up on top, that were a number of gulls were burned that I found, chicks. So those were juvenile gulls that were burned. Probably all the guillemot chicks that were in the driftwood down at the bottom were killed. Normally they're about 6 to 8 in that driftwood, and so probably lost all of those because their phenology, they're a little bit later in the season, so probably those chicks didn't survive. So the fire got up to the top, burned through part of the Zella Schultz Reserve, almost to the right to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service boundary. And they had brought in a helicopter with a bucket, and they managed to put it out pretty quickly. Grass fires you can put out fast compared to a forest fire. So it hadn't gotten into the trees. It stopped about 10 meters, so 30 feet from a tufted puffin burrow that was active. So we were lucky there. And I don't think it burned through any that were aware of any tufted puffins. And those are the ones we're really worried about out there. So, in many ways, it turned out okay. I guess the reason I was upset is just the fact that humans did this, and it's just such a dumb, senseless act.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Scott. Let's see. I don't want to stop people from jumping in and talking, but I'll go ahead and read through the chat. Let's see. Dave asked, that we do see pigeon guillemots in our area in the Puget Sound during the winter. Do you think they're local birds, or do you think there could be birds from California? I'm sure this is not a question anybody has an answer to necessarily, but
yeah, that's what I want to know, and that's what we're talking about possibly doing with Liam, is maybe putting some of these GLS tags. What you can do is you can attach it with a leg band. So you're looking at this bird here, you can attach it right above that foot, and you can right in that space. It's actually a very light band. It doesn't give us really accurate information in terms of exactly where it goes, but if you have nest boxes, you can recapture the bird the next year and you can recover that band, and then you can actually look at where that bird went. The other option is to put a GPS tag. Those are heavier. So a little less inclined to do that. But we might, and maybe just put a very small battery in them and actually just have them provide data very infrequently. So we don't know. That's a long-winded way of saying I don't know, and I'd love to know.
All right, got a bunch of chat here.
Scott, this is Terrence. So in terms of the data that this program is generating, how much of that contributes to your ability to make assessments of the population trend for this species, particularly given that it's an indicator species?
A lot. I mean, as I mentioned, that if I just look at abundance, density, and trend, I end up with an uninformed indicator, is what I like to call it. So yeah, it tells me what it's doing. It doesn't tell me why. And this kind of additional data is key to understanding why. You can also, there's some really new kinds of models, and I know Sarah's keen on this, and another one of Sarah's students has been working with us on the lark, and actually Beth's student too. And what we're doing is integrating the population, so the reproduction data, the survival data, and the abundance data in an integrated model. And that's much more informative. And these integrated population models are kind of a fairly recent trend. And I think we are going to get to the point where we'll be able to do that with the Guillemot, and that'd be really exciting.
Hi, Scott. It's Maria Ruth here. I had a question about the data being used in the case of mitigation in the case of an oil spill for pigeon guillemots. I know marbled murrelets, because they were endangered species, count for a lot when you have an oil spill and you need the company oil spill needs to be mitigated. So does the guillemot have a role in that, given the increase in oil tanker traffic through the Straits and the Salish Sea in general?
Absolutely. It's something we've been talking about a fair amount with Mark Hiffner and researchers up in British Columbia, kind of across the border. And we've been intentionally putting tags on rhinoceros auklets, is what we've been focusing on in the past on a variety of different islands. And part of that is to look at where are they foraging? What are the hot spots for their foraging? And how does that relate to where the tanker activity is? Similar to what John Kalmbakidis is doing with tags right now, putting them out at the end of the Strait of Juan de Fuca, trying to understand where those whales are in relationship to that shipping. And the same is true for the guillemot. If we can start to learn where they are in their distribution, we can understand the risk. It also helps us if we understand really important areas to a variety of different birds and mammals. It helps us respond to a spill in a way where we prioritize certain areas in terms of where we might protect animals. It also might be in areas where we spend time actually flushing animals, moving them away, because we know they're important areas. The whale's coming towards you. We're going to scare the heck out of you and get you out of here, and get you away from the oil. Those are the different kind of strategies you can use. So those kinds of maps, hotspot, cold spot maps, either based on at sea distribution or tag information, really help with that. It also helps to understand where these animals are breeding and where they are vulnerable. So we're really important nest sites. Pigeon guillemots, as you know, are central place foragers during the breeding season. they're not going very far, and they seem to be going mostly in the near shore. And so that near shore environment, if it gets affected by the oil, the information you all provided would be really, really helpful. So I think the data could be extremely helpful. We are using data right now, for example, to look at removing rabbits from Destruction Island, and we're going at using the National Pollution Fund and an old oil spill. And it's really important to know how many individuals were injured by an oil spill. And that helps us to understand how many we're going to try to benefit and how much money we can get to help try to do restoration activities. So it's another piece of that is that as well. And it's an example of what we're doing right now to try to benefit a variety of birds on that island. Does that kind of answer your question, Maria?
Thoroughly and completely, thank you.
Okay, yeah, I'm excited to hear that you're writing a book on the guillemot.
I'm trying.
Good, and which is really interesting because Eric Wagner is currently writing a book on the rhinoceros socklet, and it'd be interesting to see these two books will be really neat to look at.
Alcids are really hot right now.
Yeah, they are.
Debbie asked this, is there any evidence that pigeon guillemots return to the same colony every year?
Yes. And, we can look at Lee's data, and there's a very, very high site fidelity. And we find in general in the alcids that an awful lot of them are burrow nesters. Obviously you have the odd marbled murrelet that nests on tree branches and on cliff faces, but mostly on tree branches around here. Well, we did find one cliff, or Marty and his team found one cliff nest. The burrow itself is where the pair bond is often associated with that. And a lot of these birds will leave and they will break apart, and the pair may not stay together. The murrelet's actually another exception where they're together as a pair year round. We find even during surveys in the middle of winter, they're together all the time. They're often in pairs. Whereas a lot of our other birds, alcids, when you look at them, they're not. And so how do they find each other? Well, they find each other when they come back to the exact same burrow. And how do we know they're coming back to the exact same burrow? Well, we have them banded, and we can say, oh, I banded the bird at this burrow. And then Lee's data really shows that really nicely, that if they don't move very far from their burrow, and they usually come back to the exact same burrow.
That brings up a question I have. Is how many pigeon guillemots are banded in our area, and are they birds you're talking about, are they color banded, or is it okay, cool.
Very, very few, because Lee stopped doing that a while ago, and so it's got to be at least 10 years that she stopped. And those birds are aging, but some of them are still around with their bands on, so I know they're still there. I see them every summer, and a bunch of them still actually have their color bands. So not only do I see the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service band, the silver one, the metal one, but I also see the color ones on their legs. They often go up on if you come into, I know you can't, but when you come into Protection Island, there's a marina, because the whole island was going to develop with over 1,000 homes. And that marina was dug out, and there's a bunch of gravel kind of sloping, and the guillemots will hang out on the gravel. And when they're doing that, it's just perfect for looking at their legs, because they're just sitting there on that beach, and you can be in the boat and see who's banded and who's not. Easy to band. Lee had this fantastic system. She and her husband built the boxes. They were built out of cedar, and what she did is, and I went out there with her once to help her do, check her boxes. And what she did was wait till the bird flew into the box. And then what she would do is run out, and she put her foot in the hole of the box so it can't come back out. And then she would open up the back of the box and she could just grab the bird and put it in a bag, and then we could weigh it and measure it. And you could take a blood sample if you wanted to. You could band it, put it back. And fortunately, guillemots are not inclined to abandon their nest. It's one thing you really worry about. Tufted puffins would be on the other extreme. You would never want to do that with a tufted puffin, at least not early in the nesting season, because they would probably abandon. So it's really important to know that every bird has a little bit different response to humans. Some, if you do something like that, that kind of disturbance can result in abandonment, and you don't want that to happen. But based on her work, they seem to just go right back again, back to their usual screaming. So.
Great, thank you. Well, Scott, I want to be conscious of your time, and it's the night goes on, but I'm not seeing any other questions unless I've missed anything. Terrence, have you seen anything? That's
We got through Debbie's question. I think that was it on the chat.
Yeah. Well, Scott, thank you so much again. That was great. Really awesome. I mean, I think just really for a lot of the people that are volunteering in this work, knowing that, I mean, there's a lot of value in the personal time that people put into this, but knowing that it's that the data is being used by scientists is really, really great. And we've had Amanda came and presented to us, and having you talk about your work as well is just awesome.
Well, I really appreciate what you all do. It's nice to have people who understand their environment by experiencing it, and understand how important that nearshore environment is, particularly to spawning forage fish that are so critical to all these birds. My guess is, you see these guillemots eating very nearshore species during the breeding season: gunnels, blennies, sculpins, etc. All those are found in the very near shore, and they're found in those rocks, right in that area. And you don't think of them as being a species that eats forage fish. I suspect, though, that other times of the year, forage fish may be important to adults, and that'd be one thing I'd be really interested in knowing is during the winter, what are they eating? Is it still a very nearshore diet at that time, or are they eating forage fish, things like herring and sand lance? Well, sand lance is not very available in the wintertime, but herring and things like anchovy, etc.
Do you have, not to jump backwards, but do you have time for one more kind of question, comment? Emily, who's out on Whidbey, was noting that the colony that she surveys, or actually, I don't actually know if Emily surveys there. Anyway, Pratt's Bluff, which is on the east side of Whidbey, they had 0 prey deliveries this year, and it's usually been pretty active. And the lead there was wondering whether the large container ships in Holmes Harbor could have affected their breeding. And if you have any thoughts on that, I mean, there's a lot of like situational context of the place that you might not be familiar with, but.
Yeah, I don't know offhand. I guess what I would first do is look at your data more generally. So is it a broad trend? Is it very localized? And that, how many burrows are we talking about? Are we talking about just a couple, or are we talking about a lot? I guess those are the kind of questions I'd start with before and it'd be hard pressed to say what the cause was.
Fair enough. There we go. Said like a true scientist. All right. Well, hey everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Oh, Marid, is your hand still raised from before? Okay. All right. Good deal. thank you so much for being here tonight. I really appreciate your time, and again, thanks Scott. Thanks to everyone that contributed to our slideshow tonight. Thank you, Dave, for doing all the work that you do and for presenting tonight. It was just really fun, great way to end up our season. Yeah, we'll call it a night. Thanks again.
Thanks so long.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.